Hello, everybody, and welcome to Live and Raw podcast. This will be podcast number 8, and it's number 2 in our episodes with Deborah Stellingwerff. And so we're super excited to have her back because she's actually going to dig in deep into my saboteur profile and kind of give us some feedback and, walk us through some things that I can do in my own personal world to navigate the saboteur and get them out of my life, right? And the reason why we want to share this with you guys, and the part that makes me so excited about this is what is happening to more and more business owners all the time. And I don't know if it's just because of technology that we're starting to be more aware of it, or if it's just something that's always been there. I don't know. But the question is now is we have these saboteurs, they're in our lives. How do we get to the next level of success in our personal lives and our business lives and still be able to make things work with these saboteurs at bay? So Deborah, welcome and thank you for coming back. I so appreciate this. This is going to be a lot of fun today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me back. It's really exciting to talk about this because you're right. This is something that is coming up more and more for people, and it's not. And it always has been. We all have saboteurs. We all have self-sabotaging thoughts and behaviors, but we understand them in a way now that we never did before. And that's because, we've had such advances in the last 25, 30 years in neuroscience and our ability to map what's going on in our brain and understand what's happening and how our brains actually work. I mean, we barely scratched the surface of what's available to know about the human brain, but we do know so much more. And so we're able to take that knowledge and leverage it to our advantage. And I'm a positive intelligence mental fitness coach. Among other things. And one of the things that I do as with my clients, I'm a personal leadership and business leadership coach as well. And, key to our success is understanding how our brains work and understanding what our internal dialogue is so that we can flip the script and change that internal dialogue in a way that's going to help us to create more positive results, create lasting change, create happiness and success. And so in the positive intelligence model, we refer to those parts of our brain that sabotage us as our saboteurs and our judge. And it's just the language we use. I mean, it's one way of framing it. Mm-hmm. And it's the way of all the research and study I've done, my background as an educator and as a coach. I really love this model because it's really easy for people to grasp and integrate into their lives. We see it and I see it everywhere. Since I got this training, I see it everywhere. In everything I read, in any personal development or personal growth book, no matter what the topic, I see this stuff at work. We just put some language around it to make it easier for people to grasp. And so when we talk about saboteurs and having saboteurs, you said we all have them. And one thing I want to make clear, and we talked about this last episode too, is that we call them our saboteurs because they get in the way of us having the results we want. But when we look at the root cause of those saboteurs, they're really just how our brains have decided this is how we can be safe. And our brain's job, the goal of our brain is not to make us successful. It's to keep us safe.
That's right.
We are wired for threat. We're going to avoid anything that seems like a threat. And we're going to look for those dangers. We're going to find them. And so our saboteurs are really our survival brain kicking in to protect us from the danger that usually it's making up about the reality, about the situation. It's not real danger, but we'll find danger because we're wired for threat.
Right. Cool. That's super exciting. And I so resonate with all that because, my addictive and alcoholic brain, I dug into some books. Psycho-Cybernetics was probably, I think, the first one I read to help me understand how my brain works. And then I got into some of Joe Dispenza's books, Evolve Your Brain. And that one really opened my eyes around neuroplasticity. And I got really excited about, being able to, because, I thought because I have this alcoholic brain, I'm stuck with it, right? But what I'm realizing is I can evolve. I can grow beyond and start repurposing those neurons in my brain for other things, for better pathways, which is really cool. So why don't we jump in? Why don't we walk me through?
I will. And
My
I want to
craziness.
comment. I just want to comment on what you said, though, is like, that's why we do the work we do. I mean, you know, Wes and I got excited about coaching, or both coaches, because we've experienced in our lives that we can change our brains. We want everybody else to have that, just the wonderful experience it is when you can actually shift your brain. And so your brain is plastic, right? It's not literally, but plastic, right? The neuroplasticity, you can change it. And so that's wherein lies the hope of the work that we do with the positive intelligence mental fitness. And so, yeah, let's dive right in to looking at your assessment. If you give me permission to share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Wes, we're going to have to take a quick pause because my nose is going to drip and I need to get a tissue. So we're going to cut the part out.
I'll cut it out. I'll cut it out.
Yeah, thank you. Otherwise, I'd be sitting here the entire time rubbing my nose. Okay.
That will not work.
Okay. All right, here we go. So if you give me So if you give me permission to share the screen, I'm going to pull up your assessment.
You should be good.
Okay. Wonderful. And hold on a second. I've got to make sure I've got the thing open. There we go. I've completely, wrong one. Too many windows open.
No, you wouldn't have that problem. We don't have that shiny object syndrome, do we?
No, I was actually looking for my own results because you hadn't sent me yours. And so I was looking for,
okay.
So, okay. There we go. Now we'll come back here. And here we go. We'll share the screen. All right, so everyone who's watching, these are Wes's results, and we're going to give you the link. We gave it to you last time with the episode 1, and we're going to share that link again so you can do your assessment as well, and find out what your top saboteurs are. We all have all of these saboteurs. It's just a way of that our brain has kind of learned this is what keeps us safe. And we each, depending on our circumstances, depending on our genetic predisposition, we will have, that will determine which of the saboteurs are more prevalent or dominant in your life. But we all have all of these. So we're going to spend some time looking at Wes's top 3 so that he can understand best how to intercept those saboteurs and identify when they're taking action. Because this is what we want to do, right? By identifying our saboteurs, the whole purpose of this is so that we can then recognize when we're being sabotaged, when we are self-sabotaging. And then I shared last time, and I'll share a little bit today too, about some things you can do to intercept those saboteurs and actually move yourself into a more positive mindset when you're, instead of being in survival brain, which is, fight, flight, or freeze, which is what our saboteurs cause. We can move into a more sage perspective where we're going to be coming from self-empathy, creativity, innovation, and laser-focused action. They all come from a place of being calm. When we're in survival mode, none of that stuff happens, right? Like creativity, empathy, innovation doesn't happen from a place of fear. And really, that's what survival is about, is being in that place of fear. So Wes, I just want to acknowledge you for sharing these results. It takes a lot of courage to do this. And one of the things I know about Wes for sure is that he is a man of courage, right? He shares quite openly about his experience with alcoholism and how that impacted him and his journey out of it. And he's such an inspiration to so many, and myself included, because when somebody takes that step and really looks at themselves like, wow, something's got to change here. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And so, he's demonstrating his courage again by sharing this. And if more of us would talk openly about the fact that we all experience this, that we're not alone. Like most people, I had a conversation with a woman this morning who said, wow, I thought I was the only one. Right? I said, no, everybody experiences these feelings of lack of confidence or imposter syndrome. And there's lots of reasons why that happens in our brain. And Wes, we talked about this, right? The social aspect. We're so afraid of being rejected that we don't share what's going on inside of us. Because if we get rejected, from an evolutionary point of view, that was scary stuff. You'd be left out in the wilderness to be eaten by the saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
So, but let's get into your assessment, Wes. So your top three, and I'm just going to talk about your top three, and then we can talk about in general some of the other ones.
Sure.
But before we dive into that, I just want to say the thing here, because we've got these 9 saboteurs, and everybody's got some combination of these 9. And there's a 10th one that doesn't show up here that I share about in my program, and I'll give you a little sneak peek. It's the judge, right? How we judge ourselves. We all have it, so we don't need to include it on the saboteur assessment because we've all got the judge. And we call these the accomplice saboteurs who work in conjunction with our judge. So, Wes has a judge who's judging him as being wrong and bad and not good enough. And he enlists the help of his controller saboteur to help with the deed of like controlling Wes and making him feel like this is what I got to do to feel safe. Okay. So we all have all of these. And just because, hypervigilant or pleaser is at your bottom or victim doesn't mean that these ones don't sometimes show up. I had an incident that happened in my personal life back in December. And after several days, and my victim is way down the bottom, like you, right? It's like way down the bottom. And several days, I was in like a full-on saboteur hijack. I was completely stressed out. I was anxious. And it occurred to me, it's like, holy crow, my victim is driving the bus right now. I was very much in victim mode, which really surprised me because it's one of my lowest. But just so you know, they can show up even if they're weak. So let's get into your top ones. And our top ones are the ones that usually are the most dominant and they show up. So you've got controller, hyperachiever, and hyperrational. And let's pop on over to the results here, and we'll just share a little bit about the information about the controller. Let's see how this lands with you, Wes. I'm not sure how much time you've had a chance to spend on this, but
I've reviewed it, but that was about it.
So controller is an anxiety-based need to take charge and control of situations and people's actions to one's own will. Okay, it's high anxiety and impatience when that's not possible. So, for example, a controller has the characteristics of being really organized and is able to really take charge of things, which is a great characteristic. But we know we've moved in, yes, you got it, right? But we know we've moved into saboteur mode when it's your anxiety is fueling your need to take control. Right? Anxiety or impatience with others. So I have a strong, go ahead.
I have a really good story around where
awesome.
I think the anxiety was really, really heavy. When I was working through my
I'm going to stop share so you can tell your story. Okay, so tell us the story.
I was working through my drug rehab program with the help of our men's group. And one of the things that I found really hard to do was letting go of control. Right? They were suggesting that I just stop trying to control things and just let it happen the way it's supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And my being a business owner and a father and a husband and all those other things, and living a life of alcoholism and being in control, I found that was the most difficult thing I think I've ever done in my life was to let go of that control, because I was scared that if I did, what's going to happen? It's all just going to go to shit in a handbasket right away. And I was so fearful of letting go of that control because I didn't know what was going to happen. Right. But when I did, holy cow, was that ever freeing, like totally freeing.
So the thing that how the saboteurs work is they tell us lies. So it sounds like the lie you were being told by your saboteur was like, if I let go of control, things are going to go to shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what you shared with us is that the truth was something quite different.
Absolutely was. There was an epiphany moment there, and a very good friend of mine suggested that, because as a business owner, we tend to juggle a lot of different balls or spin plates, whatever analogy you want to use. And so I was juggling all these balls, trying to keep everything under control. And, I'd get 10 or 15 balls in the air, and then one or two would hit the ground, and I'd try to pick those up and keep juggling, and stuff just wasn't working anymore. And finally, my friend told me, he said, well, why don't you just let all the balls fall and then pick up the one that's most important to you?
Yes.
And when I got to that point, I got down on my hands and knees and I picked up the one that was most important, which was my family, of course. I just had this peace came over me, and I broke out full of emotion, because it was the most important. I mean, when you take away, if all our problems that money can solve, you quickly realize we don't have very many problems, right? And because if money can solve it, it's really not a problem. It's just an issue, right? The problems that we really have in our lives are stuff that money can't solve. And so when I looked at my family and I went, I'm pretty darn grateful that they are still with me, right? Because of the crap that I put them through, to be honest, right? It's a powerful, powerful thing. And, if someone can take from this session and learn what their saboteurs are and find the same peace that I've got, let's share this out to everyone, because to me, it's a miracle, really.
Yeah. I mean, really, I love that you call it a miracle, because self-knowledge is a miracle, right? We have, as human beings, we have this unique, as far as we know, ability to be aware of ourselves and aware of ourselves thinking. And we think we're aware of ourselves thinking, but really a lot of it's just habit, right? Like we have these grooves of how things go. And you have this ability to hold all these balls in the air, and there's somewhere the saboteur saying, you must have all these balls in the air, and you must hold all these things, and you must be doing all this, and you must be in control of it all, or else
that's exactly
you're not valuable, or else you're not worthy, or all those things. And then when you just surrender to yourself and to your inner wisdom and your inner knowing and your love for yourself, and I saw that emotion come up for you, because that's the question that I often ask people is, what is the most loving, compassionate thing you can do for yourself in this moment? Because your sage perspective will always come from that place of love and compassion for yourself. Your saboteurs are never concerned about you being happy and loving yourself. They're just concerned about keeping you from the saber-toothed tiger eating you.
Yeah.
Right. So somewhere along the line, you took on board the story that if you weren't in control of everything, you weren't safe.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so when we are aware that that's the story that's playing, that's when we can take charge and go, oh, that's just a story, right? And we can shift into what's really important here, what's really true here. And it's slowing down and releasing that control. And for a controller, that is really hard.
Oh.
Right?
Like I said, it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, it's so interesting because in your context of, most people who are on the outside of alcoholism would think, oh, well, he's out of control. He can't control it. But there's an element of controlling, even in your alcoholism, like need to control yourself, your choices, whatever, that you had to release in order to see what was really important, what was really serving and nurturing for your spirit, which was your family.
Well, I think it was more about trying to control the outcomes in my life, right? Like if there's a page in the big book, I think it's page 83. And if anyone's in part of the Alcoholics Anonymous group, they'll know that book, and they'll know the page. It described the actor, which describes me perfectly to a T. And that was, if I could control everybody to do their part in my life, in my association with what they do, things would go off like a perfect production, and I'd be happy as a pig in you know what. But the problem is nobody follows the script.
Right?
because it's their world. It's not my world, it's their world. So how are they ever going to follow my script, because I've never given it to them?
Yeah.
And so part of what I struggled with was the anger that I had around them not doing their part or living up to my expectations. And so I would turn and use that anger as an excuse to go, self-medicate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
Very
again,
great.
it's like the anger is saboteur, right? Because what's the most loving thing you can do for yourself, but what's the most loving thing you can do for those other people when they don't know your script? It's like, is to be generous with them, like, oh, they don't know my script.
Yeah.
As opposed to, what's wrong with them? Right? And the judge gets into like judging you, judging other people, judging the circumstances, like
Absolutely.
everything's bad and wrong. Whereas we can move in away from that, everything being bad and wrong and everything in control. You can still take, and you have, right? You've got a business you're running. You've run several successful businesses. You get things done. That's what a controller does. But you're getting things done now from a place of sage and wisdom and love for yourself, as opposed like going towards success instead of away from failure.
Yeah. I like to call it heart-centered, right? Because passion and purpose is driving me, not fear and regret.
Exactly. Right. And we always know when we're in saboteur mode, when it's fear and regret. When I'm trying to control something, I know that I'm in fear. And we feel it, right? So that's that distinction. All right. So I hope you guys are getting a handle on the controller and how that's showing up for Chris and how it might show up for you. A lot of people have this one, especially entrepreneurs and business people. We tend to go into creating something for ourselves because we see that there's a problem in the world that we need to solve and we want to control it, right? So we all have that. It's actually not my top 3, but it's up there pretty high for me too. So, and it really can affect our relationships and affects our with our clients and with our families as well. So let's move on to the next one. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So your next saboteur is hyperachiever. Okay, high five. Hyperachiever in me, because that was my top saboteur. And achieving is a great thing. People who are high achievers, not the same as hyperachievers. And I shared before, when I got my assessment results the first time I did this test, I got 10 out of 10 for hyperachiever. And I was like, yes, I'm awesome. And then I read the description. We're dependent on constant performance and achievement for self-respect, which means that no matter what we do, it's not enough. We're always looking for the next certification, the next project completion, the next award, whatever it is, to give us validation. And it leads us to unsustainable workaholic tendencies and a loss of touch with our deeper relationship needs. Chris, do you want to speak to that, how that shows up for you?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one where I've struggled with for a long time, simply because when failures happen, right, I tend to beat myself up big time, right? And that goes as far back as I can remember in my childhood and everything, that if I wasn't able to control the situation, I wasn't able to achieve that result. Like I remember back even when I was in the Army, me and a good buddy of mine, we used to compete for the top spot in most of the courses we went on. And I never once did I get top spot. It was always second fiddle to Sandy. The thing that I struggled with that early on, but now I look back at it and I go, well, that's probably a good thing, because it kept me wanting to keep achieving. But when I didn't get that top spot, though, I would go beat myself up for a week, right? Just literally tear myself down. And now when I'm in that space now, because I don't drink, when I tear myself down and I'm really brutal with myself, it takes me a long time to come back to that, because my self-image gets beat up. The imposter syndrome kicks in big time. And I almost feel like I'm paralyzed to go and do anything, because now not only am I able to have that self-respect, I don't have any self-respect because I failed so bad. And, after going bankrupt in 2015, that was a hard space for me to be in for, 3 or 4 months, that you know, I didn't have any respect. I couldn't hold my head up because of failure as a business owner, failure as a husband, failure as a dad. I mean, it was tough. And, you know, there's still moments, right, today where I still struggle with that imposter syndrome and beating myself up because I haven't been able to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very scary.
Yep.
What I've learned from all of that, right, is celebrate the little victories,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when you do fail, take a step back and go, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this?
Mm.
And then apply that learning. And it's one of the things that I teach in my programs is take that learning and apply it to your next plan, and then replan, re-execute, and
Mm-hmm.
keep going.
Yeah. And, you know, just because we're coaches doesn't mean we're immune to this stuff, right? Like you've done clearly, you know, Joe Dispenza's work. There's lots of other people who do NLP work. There, Tony Robbins, like everybody's in this space. We're doing the same thing. I call it mental fitness, and I take this approach to it. But, you know, you've done the work to grow your mental fitness and to build your mental resilience. And so when you're saying, well, now I'm looking at the gift being second, that, wow, it kept me going. And honestly, there's even more of a gift there. It's like, you can look back now going, second is pretty freaking amazing. You're like in the top 3, right? I mean, that's pretty darn good. And then, you know, we can still, our saboteurs are still going to be there. They're always going to be a part of us because they serve a good function of keeping us alive. But they're going to whisper sometimes, and they can send us into those places where, you know, it's 3 or 4 months that you're like down because of the bankruptcy, and you're, you know, whispering. The saboteurs are like, wow, you know, yeah, you just really suck and you just failed and all that. But what a difference than years ago when you might have just spiraled for years, right? Some people never come back from that.
It would have been so easy to stay in that space. It would have been so easy.
Oh my gosh, we love our misery. Misery's really, it feels so, it's very indulgent, right? To be in our misery. It's like, oh, poor me, I'm such a victim. And, you know, we can just feed ourselves that stuff, right? The saboteurs love that when we're low. And because it keeps us safe, it keeps us paralyzed and safe. They're like, good, he's not taking any more action. Whew, we're not going to die. Right? Because if you go out there and do something different, like start a new business, your ego, your saboteurs might die, right? Because we're quieting them, right? And we're quiet, we're good, right? And so the hyperachiever is never satisfied with what we achieve. There's always something more. And so you and I, who have high hyperachievers, are constantly working to be on alert that they don't take over and have us doing things. Because it tends to be like, oh, I'll be good enough when I finish this certification. I'll be good enough once this next video talk is done. I'll be good enough when. And sometimes it can paralyze us into inaction.
Yeah.
Right. And for 3 or 4 months, she said, you were paralyzed into inaction.
Oh, big time.
Right.
It was ugly.
Yeah.
So that brings me to a question. You mentioned ego and the saboteurs. So as business owners, I mean, we all have to have a fairly healthy helping of ego, right? I mean, I know when I started my oilfield service business, I'd gone to a wealthy relative, asked him to borrow some seed money to get me started. He said, hey, great idea, but it ain't going to work. And I said, watch me. And my ego took over. And, you know, I grew that business into millions of dollars before ultimately ended up bankrupt, right? How does ego play in with the saboteur, and how do we, I mean, because ego is a fine line. We have to kind of keep a tight leash on it, right?
Exactly. Because I want to make a distinction too between ego in its role to keep us safe. That's saboteur. Right. And I would say more of like the self-awareness and because self-awareness and self-love is that place we're coming from, is like, wow, I really believe in myself. I really love myself. That's why I'm asking this relative for some money. Because I really think I have a great idea. As opposed to the ego that steps in and sabotages, like, oh, you know what? You're never going to amount to anything. You're not special. You probably, people might laugh at you. They might say no. So when it's the ego saying like, he's not going to say no. So you just don't ask. He's not going to say yes. He's going to say no. So I don't ask. Right. So there's that distinction between that sense of, because I don't think of the ego as a good thing. I think what you're talking about is moxie and bravado, and just like, it's like, okay, I'm just going to try this and see. And because if it was your ego was attached to it, your ego is always attached to the outcome. Your ego always makes the outcome mean something about you. Right? Like, and it's not always good. Like sometimes if your relative had given you the money, your ego would have made it be like, see, I am so awesome. Not really. It's just like he gave you the money because he believed in the idea. And then if it failed and they lost some money, it's like, still, it doesn't mean anything about you. It just happened, right? Yeah. So what happens is our ego, from that perspective, where the saboteurs will take something that just is and turn it into something bad. Whereas when we're coming from a sage perspective, a positive right brain perspective, we can take that same event and turn it into something good.
Just so take notes because there's some good stuff you wrote down there.
Right? So we want to, if we're in the right brain, we're going to take the same event and turn it into something good. So think about the companies that you know who have responded to the pandemic. We've been in it for about a year now, so we're kind of getting used to it. But I still look at an example that comes to mind. And I'm going to mention a name. You can cut it out if you don't want it here. But is the Canadian Superstore, and I can't remember the owner's name. But man, how they stepped up at the beginning of the pandemic and paid their employees danger pay and were reaching out with emails every week to their customers that happen to be on the email list because of the loyalty card, right? And they were responding and they were stepping up. Like, how can we do things differently? How can we show up? Let's acknowledge this. Let's show up and go, we're in this together. We're working on it. As opposed to some other companies who like, oh my God, we have to survive. Let's lay all our employees off. Yeah. Right. Now, I don't want to judge people that they made the wrong decision because we don't know all the circumstances.
Well, I look at it, there's three kinds of people in this world, right? Mm-hmm. And I relate to business owners and regular people. There's the business owners that are the movers and the shakers, right? Like the company you just mentioned. Then there's the ones that stand around and watch what happens. They've taken a wait and see approach. Yeah. And then they're the ones that wonder what happened. Like they've bought into the crisis news network and social media, and oh my God, Chicken Little, the sky is falling.
Yeah, and they responded from fear. So they were in saboteur mode. So we can look at them not with judgment, but with compassion and say, wow, they were completely hijacked by their saboteurs, and they were so afraid that they were operating from fear rather than looking at moving into a sage perspective and right brain, going, wow, what's the gift or opportunity here? Because the sage, which is the opposite of the saboteurs, always looks for the gift or opportunity, right? So we can know when, I see it everywhere now, when people are like freaking out or upset, I'm like, oh, wow, they're hijacked. I mean, I can't, not everybody wants the help, but when you can look from that perspective, it's such an interesting place to be, right? That you're just like watching life happening and how all of us are being driven around by our brains. We think we're thinking, but really our brain is just doing everything on autopilot. We can shift that. So, right. And that's so back to your assessment results and the hyperachiever, right? If we're so afraid to do anything different because it might be a mistake, instead we stand by and watch things happen.
Yeah.
Right. Or we just run and hide. Right. And so that's the hardest thing with the hyperachievers is that people assume that we get a lot done. And because for hyperachievers, our comfort zone is like way out here, like way out there. So everybody else thinks we're getting a lot done. And we know we're actually not getting as much done as we could. And that's when we pick up our sledgehammer and we beat ourselves up about it. And so that's the key for you hyperachievers out there, for Wes and me too, is to be aware of that. And just go, what can I get done today that's going to move me closer to my goal?
And that's a powerful thing, when we talk about time management. I mean, a lot of business owners I talked to recently, their biggest issue is time management. And I like to argue that hey, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's what we choose to focus on that makes the difference, right? And I used to be one of those Franklin Planner guys where write down a big long list, prioritize A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. And I still use my Franklin planner. I actually went back to it this year simply because I needed to stay focused. But I only list the top 3. I only have 3 A's on my list, and those I need to get done. The rest, well, if they get done, great. If they don't, well, if I forward them 3 or 4 times, then they just fall off my list. I try to focus on looking at what is the one thing that I can do. That I think it's called the big domino theory. The one thing that I can do that'll make everything else on my list irrelevant.
Yes.
And then focus on doing that.
You know, and I always say to people when they come to me with time management problems and time management challenges, I'm like, that's not really your problem, right? Time management is not your problem, because if it were, you would have solved it by now. You know, there's like over 1,100 apps in the Apple App Store alone on time management and productivity. So, and when you do a Google search of productivity or time management, there's like 4 billion hits. Okay. If that were our problem, we would have solved it.
Yeah.
The real problem is at the root of our thinking, our saboteurs. How is our brain trying to keep us safe? So if you have, I've had 2 conversations already today before you with clients about just these things, time management. It's like, it's not really a problem. Time management is not your problem. The problem is your brain is looking at that uncomfortable task or conversation as something to be avoided. And so you are avoiding it because it thinks it's going to kill you. So, you know, really it's not, but your brain doesn't know that. There's like, for all our sophistication, we're pretty primal and basic, you know, creatures. And so that's the thing, is to get our heads around, is like, what is really going on behind the scenes? And understanding what are we avoiding, why are we avoiding it helps us. And hyperachievers, we tend to be among the worst when it comes to keeping track of our schedule. So I do something similar, Chris, like what Wes is, that I do the, you know, I look each morning, I wake up and I take my 10 deep breaths, and then I imagine my day and what's going to make me feel really great at the end of the day. Now I have a ton of fun projects I'm working on right now that I could be, and I'm always aware of all the details. And today I had several appointments, including this one, that meant that today wasn't going to be a day where I was going to be able to move a lot of those forward.
Yeah.
And rather than beating myself up about that, I'm just like, okay, that's okay. I'm going to do this one thing that's going to contribute to moving those things forward, you know, in between my calls today, right? And actually, it's not true. I did 2. One's done already. One's going to get done after this call, right? So, and I schedule them for specific times. And that helps my hyperachiever to feel like I got something done and I can be good enough by the end of the day.
Nice.
Yeah. Let's move over to your 3rd top saboteur.
Absolutely.
Ooh, hyperrational. So with that little I'm going to let you talk first on this one.
Oh my goodness. Perceived as cold, distant, and intellectually arrogant. I don't know if I've ever been called intellectually arrogant, but I've certainly been called arrogant. And simply, you know, I think a lot of that was, you know, perceived that I was overconfident that I could go do something. And so folks looked at it as arrogance. Little did I know, you know, that was back in my alcoholism. Little did I know it probably was arrogance, me acting like I was self-confident, like I could go and do these things and like I could make it happen. And yeah, I mean, I do come with a fairly good dose of confidence that I can go out and, you know, do whatever I put my mind to.
Which is great when it's not coming from fear of feelings. And this way, because the intellect, the hyper-rational is like, all things must be decided by the rational mind. You know, and we know now, as I talked about at the beginning of this call, what we know about our brains and science has told us that we have the same cell type in our gut as our brain. So for that saying, trust your gut, is, I don't know, thousands of years old, trust your gut. So we knew before we had science prove it, that our gut and our brain are connected. And so now science has proven that our cells are the same. And so the hyperrational, though, will discount that. Like, oh, we can't make decisions based on feelings. We have to make decisions based on all the rational data. And you can see where that becomes problematic.
Us as humans, we all make decisions based on emotion, then we try to justify it later with the intellect, right?
Exactly, right? And so, and we never have all the information available to us. So we do the best we can with the information we do have. But some people, if they're in hyperrational, get completely paralyzed and can't make a decision at all because they don't have all the information. They can't predict the future.
And they get totally paralyzed by doing that. I had an operations manager that worked for me that was like that. He would go 2 days without making a decision on something, and I'm going like, how come we haven't moved this forward? And he goes, I don't have all the data yet. And I said, well, that's all you're going to get. Make a decision. And he refused to, because he didn't feel like he had enough information. And I think a lot of it was he was scared to make the wrong decision.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to know what his other saboteurs, because if he had a hyper rational and a high pleaser, or even a hyper rational and an avoider, because you're gonna have those things kind of combined together, because the avoider is going to avoid making decisions, going to avoid anything uncomfortable, right? And the pleaser is going to be super concerned about making sure you're happy, and what if he makes the wrong decision and then you're unhappy? So that's one of the ways the hyper rational can show up. But there's that intellectual arrogance. He comes out like, I know, right? I know the way this should be done, and I have it all rational. And we kind of discount feelings. And even though we know, even when you say it, intellectually, we know our feelings are involved in making decisions, we still want to know all the reasons, we want everything figured out. And sometimes that can get in our way and get us stuck, right? I find that hyper rationals tend to be the ones who get stuck about making decisions. I mean, everybody does, because we all fear the future all the time, because the future's unknown, right? And our brain's trying to protect us against the future that's potentially threatening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know.
So how else would you say that the hyper rational shows up for you?
Well, bring it back up on the screen there, and I'll kind of look at it. But in my alcoholism, I definitely didn't have much for emotion, right? Like I kept it all bottled up pretty good.
Well, you had it, but it was here, right? You don't let people into your deep emotional feelings. I mean,
actually, I had it stuffed so down so deep, I didn't even go there myself. Right?
Yeah.
It was down there so deep, right?
Doesn't mean they weren't there, but they were stuffed down, right?
That's right. Certainly, I lose track of time with intense concentration for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Private, yeah, I was very private. People never did really get to know me because I didn't want them to know the real me. And I think because of that was because they'd see how much of a fraud I was, right? That imposter syndrome was really big. And that's why I kept self-medicating all the time, is so that I can keep that monster at bay, right? So, feelings to me, because I had so much anger, feelings were distracting, they were irrelevant. You're just wasting your time. My ex-wife, she'd break down and crying, and I get mad at her because she was being emotional.
Yeah.
I mean, she had a valid reason for breaking down and crying. And I'm just going like, suck it up, princess.
Yeah.
Let's get it over.
That's a brilliant example of how the hyper-rational can show up. Because the hyper-rational says, you are not allowed to have emotions. Wes, you have to stuff your emotions down, because if you don't, you're not safe.
Yeah.
So anybody else showing emotions kind of reminds you that you have them too. And holy, that is not safe. Right? So it's super uncomfortable. If you're judging yourself for feeling emotions to the point where you're stuffing them down, you're not going to be tolerant of anybody else around you showing emotion.
Yeah.
And you can see the impact that has on relationships. You're divorced from that woman now.
That's right.
So, I mean, that's the important thing that I want to make sure everybody leaves here with today. We've gone through your top 3, and there's some others, and everybody's going to get a chance to do the assessment and book a call with me if you want to talk it through. I can share with you how you can take this learning and knowledge and take it and go deeper with it, and actually transform your life and your thinking with some of the resources and the program that I do. But if nothing, I want you to take that from today, is that this has a huge impact on your well-being, your stress levels, your results, and your relationships. And so if we understand how we're being sabotaged and we move ourselves into empathy for ourselves and stop judging ourselves, we will stop judging other people.
Absolutely.
I can always tell how much I'm judging myself by how much I'm judging other people.
Absolutely.
That person's an idiot. If that comes out of me, like, whoa, what's going on here? Because there's something going on inside of me that tells me I'm actually judging myself. Because if I'm saying they're an idiot, what I'm really saying is it's not okay to make mistakes. And if that's my belief, and I'm a hyperachiever, and it's not okay for me to make mistakes, well, then I'm not going to do anything. And then, so on and so on, right? So that's always a good gauge for me if I find that I'm getting really judgmental of other people.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I found in my alcoholism and everything else that I've done in my life is when I'm aware, I can fix it, right? In my alcoholism, in my using days, I was absolutely blind to all the destruction, all the pain, all the broken relationships that I was causing. I had no clue. And once I became aware of it, and I started going, oh crap, right? That 747 that was flying behind me, it's crashed. It's all over the piece. It's all over the ground in pieces. But now moving forward, I'm aware. And when just like you said, when you become aware of your behavior, you can stop and change it.
Yes. Right. And the thing is that whether it's, you chose alcohol as your buffer of choice. Like this stuff's pretty uncomfortable. Self-awareness can be super uncomfortable when you're used to pushing things down. I mean, I come from an English background on both sides, right? Like very no feelings allowed. Thank you very much. Right? Like the British are known for not having feelings.
Yeah.
Okay. Being very rational and proper. And so, it was very much that in my upbringing was like, be proper, don't lose control of yourself. And so it can be very difficult for me to have those feelings. And I was very much Hyperrational is my fourth, I think. Right. So, and so I've got all those really exciting, wonderful saboteurs who are trying to protect me from imminent danger of having my feelings. And so it's something I've had to really work through and get used to, having my feelings and experiencing these things. And guess what? I'm still here. I didn't die. And it can be super uncomfortable. So we will choose to buffer in whatever way we will choose. Some of us, it's alcohol. Some of it's shopping. Some people, it's eating. Some people, it's hyperachieving, right? Yeah. The more awards I get, the better I'm going to feel about myself. So I got to keep doing the awards, right? Some people, it's Netflix. Some people, it's sex and promiscuity. Like we all have different ways. So when we're ready to stop buffering and really be with ourselves, it's really scary at first, because our survival brain has been saying, no, let's just do this. Let's just have this drink or buy this $1,000 handbag that we can't afford, and we'll feel better.
My daughter's exactly that. She'll go out and buy stuff she can't afford.
Yeah. Right. And it's like she's buffering because it makes her feel better for a minute. Because that's the thing, is I'm a recovering shopaholic, right? I used to do that. I used to shop to make myself feel better and make myself feel in control. And I don't do it anymore because I've done the work. And it feels great to be going, oh, I'm feeling the desire to go spend some money that I don't have, or that maybe I do have and I don't really need to buy that thing. And I'm like, so I want to look at that. I'm always now very conscious of, why do I want to buy that thing? Is it because it's going to bring me joy? Or is it because it's going to make me feel better? Because if it's going to make me feel better, I don't want it. If it's going to bring me joy, that's so different. And so just being aware of what are those things you're buffering with and why is that first step. Because let me tell you, and I think, Wes, you will probably second this, it's not as bad as you think it's going to be on the inside. Because you are inside, you're naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and you are capable of so much, and you're capable of experiencing extreme joy. And for some people, that's really scary. And this is why we push down everything. But let me tell you, it's worth it. It really is worth it to be with your feelings. You can do hard things. there's nothing you can't handle, including your uncomfortable feelings.
Oh yeah, that is so true. So true. I second that 100%. 100%, dear. What an amazing show. I'd love to dive into the rest of it, but we've been about 50 minutes here on this, and it's going to make a great podcast. So I'm so excited that you were able to share your wisdom with me and kind of dig into kind of my saboteurs and share with you a little bit about exactly where I'm coming from, which is chaos and darkness and ugly stuff, right? But somebody asked me once, there's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is to quit drinking. That was the hardest thing. The second thing was to be able to look back in my life and realize that even if I could go back and change everything, I wouldn't, because I love who I am today. And even though there's a lot of darkness and ugliness in my past that I'd love to be able to go back and fix things, I know I can't, but I don't know if I'd even want to, just because I'm really happy with who I am. And if I hadn't gone through that stuff, I wouldn't be where I am today.
It's part of your life curriculum, right? That was your curriculum. And we don't need to worry about the why. We just need to know it happened for you. Life happens for you. And if you can decide to let life happen for you and work with life as it presents itself, rather than trying to control it or hyper-rationalize it or hyper-achieve it away, then you can come to that place where you're like, wow, these things happened as an opportunity for me to grow. And we can look at it as like, that was a gift. Even that is a gift that you now bring to other people because you had that experience. And I want to make that trite, but it's true, right? Because you can now understand, what it is to do battle with yourself, right? And it doesn't work. And then you moved instead from doing battle with yourself to loving yourself. And there's the key. That's the work we do. At the end of the day, we're both business coaches, we're leadership coaches, but at the end of the day, that's what we do, is we help people love themselves better so they can get the results they want and achieve what they want to achieve, so they can make an impact on the lives of people they care about, their clients, their family, the rest of the world.
Right on. Right on. I can't say anything more to that. So at that point, we're going to call it a show. Thank you so much for joining us today, Deb.
Thanks,
your
Wes.
wisdom is powerful. I just can't wait to see what kind of results everybody else that watched this show is going to get from taking your assessment on the saboteur in their lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.